Police in the city of Toronto and elsewhere say they have additional patrols as they monitor whether the events in Iran will cause any disruptions locally. And for more on the increased safety measures across the GTA, we are joined live by CTV's public safety analyst and former OPP commissioner, Chris Lewis. Chris, it's great to have you on this evening. Now, this is not the first time we are hearing police services across the GTA step up patrols when there is conflict overseas. How are they dealing with this kind of situation?
Well, good evening, CJ. It's going to be largely an intelligence gathering exercise and really trying to determine who or where may there be threats in the GTA. I mean, some of them are obvious. Around the U.S. consulate in Toronto, maybe Canadian government establishments because of the fact that Canada has strongly supported the U.S. in their efforts in terms of the nuclear peace in Iran. But we're also going to have a number of protests that will maybe overwhelm police, because if you get 150,000 that are very much in favor of regime change, and then get a couple of hundred that are opposed to that and opposed to the attack, the conflict could get to the streets and get very serious. So gathering intelligence, working together, tapping into the RCMP and CSIS, making sure they're up to date, high visibility, and then, of course, planning around protests and responding to them.
And like you mentioned, there was a rally and protest in Richmond Hill this afternoon, 200,000 people, even a larger one in Toronto. How do police handle that size of a crowd?
Well, it's a huge issue. I mean, Toronto has been faced with, I think, 4,000 protests in the last couple of years, mostly related to the Israel-Hamas conflict, and all that's not over. So some of those protests will continue. Those that are really opposed to Israel may well have protests that, to continue to protest against Israel, but now with this whole new piece added onto it. So for Toronto police to plan around that, once again, intelligence-led, they rely on sources and monitoring of social media to really try and determine how big the crowds are, and then have an appropriate number of personnel there. But it's always a moving target, and sometimes they pop up and they're bigger than anyone anticipated. So it's really a matter of trying to get in there, keep the peace, have enough officers to do so, and then let the system kind of run its course that day and react from an enforcement perspective if they need to.
And I imagine police services are getting a ton of calls related to situations like this. How do they determine what kind of threat is actually real at this time?
It's really an intelligence gathering exercise, and all the police services are very well linked in from an intelligence perspective. They're linked into the RCMP and CSIS. They know who the people are that are real threats, and they quite often know ahead of time what protests may get out of hand and what people are in the crowd that may cause problems. So monitoring all of that and keeping ahead of it is a huge amount of work for Toronto Police and others in the GTA. They'll be on top of it. But once again, these protests are, I think, the bigger concern because they're just so hard to manage. And Toronto Police and other police services only have so many people. And they have other jobs to do besides this ongoing need for protest enforcement and presence there.
And how do they manage that? Like you mentioned, they have other jobs, daily crime and public safety to take care of. How do they handle these protests that pop up? Like this one in Richmond Hill, it was planned before the attack. So you can just imagine how many more people showed up today after everything that happened.
It's a very, very difficult thing to say ahead. Toronto Police have dealt with more in the last few years than probably ever in their history, all those years combined. And where did all those officers come from? They can only have so many that they either put on overtime or take from other duties because they still have thousands of calls every day to respond to. So it's a huge amount of work for the planning team and for senior Toronto officers to put together the staff, the working constables on the street who will be there and put in this position. Some highly trained to do so, some less so because they're pulled from other jobs. So, they'll have to rely on the OPP and others potentially as some of these protests grow.
Okay, clearly an all-hands-on-deck effort. CTV public safety analyst and former OPP commissioner Chris Lewis, thanks so much for your time as always.
Thanks, CJ. Have a good evening.
Let's take you live to Hamilton, where police are sharing an update on the 2023 murder investigation of Daniel Musafiri.
The suspect then fled the area in a black Dodge Challenger. Since that time, members of the Hamilton Police Homicide Unit have remained actively engaged in this investigation. During the course of investigating another occurrence, detectives obtained new information that provided additional intelligence linking a suspect to Daniel's death. Investigators were then able to build upon the evidence gathered during the early stages of the case, which ultimately led to the identification of a suspect. As a result of this ongoing investigation, Eric Colanos, a 29-year-old Hamilton man who was already in custody on an unrelated matter, has now been arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Daniel Musafiri. For more than 2 years, Daniel's family has carried the unimaginable weight of losing a loved one to violence. Our investigators recognize the profound impact his death has had on those closest to him, and we have remained committed to pursuing justice on their behalf. While no arrest can undo the pain of this loss, we hope this development provides some measure of relief to Daniel's family as the matter proceeds through the courts. We would also like to thank members of the community who came forward with information and supported investigators throughout this lengthy investigation. Their cooperation played an important role in advancing this case. I'll now take some questions.
It was previously reported that this case was connected to Project Churchill, perhaps because of the location of the shooting, but can you clarify whether there was a connection?
I can tell you from this investigation, we have no information that connects either the accused or the victim with Project Churchill or the HMS gang.
Previously, around the time of the shooting, we were looking for the suspect vehicle and also I think a woman that was a witness seen fleeing from the area. Can you clarify whether either of those were located?
We were able to identify the witness. The vehicle has not been located.
What about the weapon?
The weapon also still remains outstanding.
Do you have any information about what the nature of the interaction was or the conversation was before the shooting?
The interaction would be evidence before the court, and I'm unable to comment on that.
Did it happen inside the billiards hall?
It was outside.
Did they interact earlier in the night, or was that for their first meeting?
There was a brief interaction, and then several minutes later, another interaction where the homicide happened.
So both those interactions happened outside in the area where Daniel was shot?
That's correct.
Not at the billiards place at all, they didn't?
That's correct.
But any indication that they had ever crossed paths before? Were they known to each other, or was this the first interaction?
I have no information that they were known to each other prior to this night.
Daniel was in the billiards place that night, though, correct?
He had been at the billiards place, yes.
But Eric Colanos was not?
As far as we know, no.
Can you tell us what the arrested person was in jail for?
So he is awaiting sentencing on human trafficking charges.
So was this like a random in the sense that they didn't know each other at all, but then they had this brief interaction, and then Mr. Colanos tried to open fire? Like there was no, this was not targeted. It was or it was random in their relationship, but it was targeted in that interaction, from that interaction?
I can say that the victim was targeted by Mr. Colanos, but I have no indication that it was targeted prior to that night. It was an incident that had happened all in a very short period of time.
Mr. Colanos was the subject of a rope squad release less than a week after the shooting, where he was wanted for breaching parole, and then he was arrested, I think, a couple weeks later. Do you know anything about his movements after the shooting and whether you believe that his breaching parole was in connection to the homicide? Like, was he hiding out?
So I know that at the time he was wanted on a parole revocation warrant. There were active efforts being made to locate him, and I don't believe that the parole revocation was directly connected in any way to this investigation.
And just to clarify, so he was out on parole at the time of Daniel's murder?
He was on parole, but he was wanted for breaching that parole.
Prior to the shooting?
Prior to the shooting,
Okay.
yes.
He was on parole, but
He had breached, but they were actively looking for him.
at the time?
Yes.
So what is the reason, what is your theory, or what is your theory for why this happened? It was just...
So beyond what I've already discussed, it would be evidence before the court, and I can't get into that.
You can't say any more about the conversation or what they were discussing?
Not at this time.
Was this caught on video?
We do have video evidence of the area that assisted the investigation.
You don't have it, do you have video of the moments that Daniel was killed?
I won't comment on the specific video that we have as evidence before the court.
How soon after the homicide was Eric Khamenei identified as a closely registered suspect?
He was someone that entered into our investigation early on. However, it took a period of time to acquire enough evidence to lay a charge. The fact that he was in custody provided us with the extra opportunity to conduct the investigation without concerns for public safety.
And that's because the Jordan clock starts ticking as soon as starts or waits at 8 at that time?
That's correct.
Right.
Have you been in contact directly with his family overseas?
I've spoken to some of his family in the recent days, advising them of the arrest. I can tell you that it does, help them to move forward. But I have been speaking to them.
And can you talk about, how long Daniel has been here in Hamilton and about his life and his connections here?
I don't have specific information about how long he had been in Hamilton. I do know that he did have a number of friends and family in the area that thought very highly of him. He was charismatic. He had a golden smile, contagious laugh, and they all deeply miss him.
Can you speak to, what was the break in this? You referred to it as, there was information that led you to the person that you arrested here. But what was the aha moment? What was the...
I'm not going to get into the specific evidences before the court.
Is there any indication that this is connected to any other shootings in Hamilton or any other incidents recently?
There's no evidence to connect this homicide with any other shootings in the city. Yeah. Okay. No more questions? Okay. Thank you, Adam.
Hamilton police are just providing an update on the murder of this person in 2023, Daniel Musafiri. They gave us an update. He was shot and killed on December the 29th, 2023 at just 29 years old.
Police have announced the arrest of a suspect in the murder of a 15-year-old Jakai Jack in Toronto last June. Homicide investigators have now identified 20-year-old Abdul Yarababa as a suspect last week and say he was arrested in Calgary the next day. He's now been returned to Toronto and is charged with second-degree murder. He's due to make a court appearance this morning. Now, police say the 15-year-old was shot in an unprovoked attack near James Street and Emmett Avenue. Two other men, a 19-year-old and 21-year-old, have been charged with accessory after the fact to murder.
More now on a Toronto man who was charged in a major fraud investigation in York Region. Joining us live now with more is York Police Constable Kevin. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us what happened here.
Yeah, so this investigation began last year in March when a victim came forward to report an investment scam. He reported that in February of the year prior, 2024, they invested a quantity of funds through the suspect who owned Equity Line Service Corporation and was promised a return on their investment. Now, through this investigation, it was learned that in February 2025, 5 additional victims had invested a quantity of funds as well with the same suspect. And now it is believed that the suspect misappropriated the invested funds from the victims for his own personal gain. In total, it was over $2.5 million that was invested. And because of the work of our financial crimes unit, the 40-year-old man from Toronto has now been charged with 6 counts of fraud over $5,000.
Can you tell us that you're thinking that these aren't the only people that were frauded by this man? Are you looking for more?
Yeah, we are. The investigation is still ongoing. And again, we are putting the male's photo out because our investigators do believe that there are additional victims and encourage them to come forward if they have any similar cases like this one.
What do you have any advice for victims?
Yeah, so I mean, scams happen all the time. Investment scams are a bit more specific in terms of what to look out for. It usually starts with a claim that, if you invest a certain amount of money, you're going to get a lot back, and sometimes that is with little or no risk. So people should be aware of that, as well as people getting information from someone they might know, or a friend of a friend who says, hey, I have this investment opportunity for you. Feel free to invest however much you want, and I'm going to get you a return. A lot of the times it is proven to be false, and so it goes without saying that if something feels too good to be true, you should probably trust your instinct and look into that person, into that company that they are vouching for. Look into it a bit more to see what they are about. Another tactic that these scammers are using is to pressure the victim into making a decision. When it comes to high value investments, they will use high pressure tactics because they want to get their money and essentially move on to the next victim.
We know that this person, we're showing his photo now of Sergei Shavyalev, used the money for his own personal gain. Can you tell us if that money, you were able to recoup that money? Does he have it, or is it all spent?
Our investigators are still trying to track exactly where those funds went to, but based on the evidence obtained so far, they have reason to believe that those funds that were invested through him were misappropriated for his own personal gain.
Thank you so much for this. We appreciate it. York Police Constable Kevin Nabrija. Toronto has been hit hard by snowstorms this season, leaving messy conditions and frustrated residents dealing with uncleared sidewalks and now bike lanes. Some are questioning whether the city should actually pay residents to help clear snow after major storms. In New York, where the region recorded up to 48 centimeters of snow last week, officials are recruiting temporary emergency snow shovelers. They're tasked with clearing bus stops, crosswalks, and fire hydrants. The pay starts at $19 an hour and can go as high as $30 an hour during blizzard conditions. The program has proved popular. The mayor says more than 1,400 people signed up in a single day. Joining me now to discuss the New York model and whether a program like this could be implemented in Toronto is Maddie Simiatiki, director of the Infrastructure Institute at U of T. So thank you, first of all, for joining us this morning. So how would something like this be implemented in Toronto? Do we need it, and would it work?
So I think first things first, we've had a terrible year with snow, and I think people are looking for quick snow clearance. The New York model gets you thinking. And in principle, the idea is that you call on your neighbors, you call on residents, it's a rapid response. And I like the idea of the city getting after it, having people who come out with a shovel and participate. Now, this is not a replacement for all the big equipment that's needed and the heavy machinery and the skilled workers who help to clear our snow every day and every year. But this is an assistance. And I do think there's an opportunity to think about how we tap into the skill and effort of residents to help contribute to clearing snow more quickly.
So New York has their snow cleared much more quickly than we do. Do you think we intentionally are okay with the slower cleanup to keep our taxes lower?
This is exactly it, Arda. It's a trade-off between cost and speed. We spend less money than Montreal, even though Montreal is a smaller city than us, and Montreal gets better service. We also don't really have contracts for snow removal at scale, and so that's also been an issue. There's only so much you can clear if you can't then remove it, and that's why you see the big piles of snow that are causing problems all across the city. So really, you start out talking at a big level about how we get rid of snow, and before you know it, you're into contracts and budgeting and all the minutiae of how a city operates.
So New York has experimented with having residents clear areas like bus stops and crosswalks. Do you think this is innovative urban resilience, or do you think that this is evidence that cities are struggling to keep up with all the snow and clearing it after weather?
I think it's a bit of both. I actually think it's a bit of performative theater. And in that regard, I don't mind that. I think that after a huge snowstorm, people are generally willing to accept that there was a big event and something happened. But what they want to see is action. They want to see people out there. They want to see that the cavalry has arrived to help them get out of their homes, to help people get to their appointments or to their work. And so really, I think there is something about having people out on the street. You know, I like the idea of something like a Toronto core, where we bring people on, we have a roster of people who have said we are willing and able to come out to help contribute. Today it could be a snowstorm. In the summer it could be flooding. It could be a blackout. And that we have people who are ready and willing and able, and that the city has a roster of people they can call, that they show that it's very physical, it's very kinetic, that there are people out there who are ready to respond to the needs of our residents.
So do you think that Toronto needs to totally scrap what they're doing and have a completely new plan, or should they just scale up what they're doing right now?
We're in scale up. We have a plan, and it's generally worked better than last year. But as you see, each year there are gaps. And I think in this case, the big thing is snow removal. We need to have the removal contracts, the big equipment that then shovels the snow into dump trucks and carts it away. That has been the biggest issue. At a certain point, when you have enough snow, when you have 60 centimeters fall, there's nowhere to put it on the sides of the streets. And in places like Montreal, they do removal at scale. And that's been a real issue for the city of Toronto because of the contracts. So again, you start out with this big principle that we want the streets cleared quicker, and before you know it, you're into the minutia of how a contract is drafted, and that's really been an issue here in Toronto.
If you could change one thing so that we could see these results happen quicker, would it be funding? Would it be staffing? Would it be the way things are governed?
Can I say two things?
Yeah.
One is the funding. I think we need more money going into this. We need to be investing at the scale of our peers if we want this to go faster. And then I do think people want to see something visible. I like the idea of having people out there clearing the bus stops, clearing the fire hydrants, clearing in front of seniors' homes, for example, so that people can get out of their houses and homes. This is so important for our city. And just being able to see it, I think, gives people a sense that there is a response and that the city cares.
Thank you so much, Maddie. We really appreciate your time. Maddie Simiatiki is the director of the Infrastructure Institute at the University of Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you.